virtual town hall to wrap up 2023. I am in Washington, D.C. We are completing the session for the first session of the 118th Congress. And while I would always prefer to be with you in person, many of these issues are urgent and important, and I wanted to talk to you as quickly as possible. And so we're going to have a conversation tonight about many of the issues that you care about. I want to first just tell you that for the town hall tonight, I asked you to email me your questions. And so here's how it's going to go down. You have emailed me your questions. Thank you for that. And I have here a bowl of your questions. I do not know, they're not marked in any way other than what you have written. I will pull them out randomly, very much in the same fashion of how we do our town halls at home. I also have some constituents who have issues that I think kind of go across the spectrum of what I've heard from many of you in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to allow them to personally ask questions. But before I do that, I just want to just lay out for you where I see, where we've come this year and where we're going in the upcoming year. We tomorrow will be voting on an impeachment inquiry of President Biden. And so we're going to start the year, we're going to end the year essentially how we started, which is in absolute chaos. I don't know if Republicans have the votes to do this. I do know a few things, that it's an extreme political stunt, that there's no evidence of wrongdoing, and that most of my Republican colleagues have never accepted the outcome of the 2020 election and will do anything to try and overturn that election, whether it's through violence or through impeachment. And so I will vote against that tomorrow. I'm a former impeachment manager, and so I think I know what is worthy of impeachment, and I don't see anything here. But that is at a cost of not focusing on what I think you care about in the questions that you've submitted to me. So it's not focusing on making sure you have breathing room and affordability in your personal finances and giving you financial freedom. It's not focusing on making sure every woman across America has the right to an abortion, freedom of her body. It's not focusing on making sure that your kids, when they go to school, have the freedom to come home because they're safe and free from gun violence. It's not focusing on making sure that we have a right to vote and for that vote to be counted. It's not focusing on making sure you have a right and a freedom to read whatever you want to read and not have your books banned. So anything you care about, you're not seeing get done here in this 118th MAGA-led Congress. And I promise to continue to be a part of the firewall that stops any of these, insane efforts to rule rather than to govern. And on everything that's mattered that we've done, everything that's consequential that we've done this Congress, Democrats have delivered the majority of the votes, from paying America's bills and lifting the debt ceiling to keeping the government open twice at the risk of a shutdown. So we've delivered those votes. We have shown competence, a love for community against their chaos and an urge, to corruptly defend Donald Trump at every turn this Congress. And so that is kind of what I've been working on here. I've heard a lot from you about what's happening in the Middle East. And that's also a cost of a Congress that focuses incessantly and obsessively over impeaching Joe Biden. We have not been able to pass any humanitarian package that can help the Middle East. We've not been able to pass any aid package that can keep Ukraine in the fight. We've not been able to pass any package that would help Taiwan deter China from invading. And so you care a lot about what's happening in the Middle East. I care a lot about what's happening in the Middle East. And we have not been able to pass anything that would address that. As we are 2 months out since the brutal, savage attack on October 7 that the terrorist group Hamas committed against innocent Israelis just north of Gaza, we have seen Israel in its right to defend itself go after Hamas. And you have expressed to me, many of you have expressed to me, varying views about what you would like to see in this conflict as far as the United States role. And I hear you. And I want you to know that I value any innocent Palestinian life in Gaza the same way I value any innocent life in Israel. And I will continue to expect that as Israel defends itself and seeks to root out Hamas and its ability to carry out an attack like this again, that we have an expectation, and Israel has a primary responsibility to make sure it protects against innocent life. And I will echo what Secretary of State Blinken has said, which is there has been too much of a loss of innocent life in this conflict. And that is on the Israeli government to protect against it. And, the American people, who have suffered terrorist attacks ourselves, will expect that innocent lives are protected. In that spirit, I want you to know something I just signed on to recently. The ranking member, that means the highest level Democrat of the Foreign Affairs Committee, sent a letter to the administration urging them to make sure that any defense systems that we provide to any country in the world, including Israel, would require that that country follows human rights laws, including protecting innocent people in conflict. And so I signed that because I do vehemently and fervently believe that these, the Palestinian people have every right to expect that they would be protected as Israelis would themselves. But I'm not new to making sure that I stand up for the Palestinian people, and recognizing that my district has a large Muslim and Arab American community that is connected sometimes directly, sometimes culturally, sometimes religiously to what's happening in the Middle East. And so I want you to know that whether it was supporting the Iran nuclear deal back in President Obama's second term to make sure that Iran would not get a nuclear weapon, and that we would also ensure that there was not a war between Iran and Israel, I supported President Obama on that. In 2017, there was a House resolution condemning former President Obama when he demanded a veto on a United Nations resolution which declared Israeli settlement in the West Bank and East Jerusalem illegal. I voted to prevent President Obama from being condemned because I oppose settlements. And I have always opposed settlements during my time in Congress. When President Trump put in place a Muslim ban, not only did I oppose it, not only did I send letters opposing it, I went to SFO, I brought my staff, we brought lawyers, and we protested against the Muslim ban, and we assisted people who had gotten wrapped up in it and were unfairly targeted by the administration. Recently, I sent a letter to President Biden and Secretary Blinken expressing concern about the effects on babies and children of the Israel-Hamas war and urging the administration to do everything possible to free hostages, but also protect Palestinian children and infants. Also, I want you to know that I led my own letter recently and had about 60 Democratic colleagues join me in telling President Biden and Secretary Blinken that we must press the Israeli government to crack down on extremist settler violence that is occurring in the West Bank, and that those extremist settlers, who some of them are being sanctioned rightfully, should not see the conflict in Gaza as an opportunity to push farther into the West Bank and displace innocent Palestinian people. Many of you have written to me and asked for a ceasefire, and I share the goal of seeing this conflict end as soon as possible. However, there are 100+ Israeli American hostages that are still in Gaza. And so to me, support of a ceasefire means that both sides have negotiated this ceasefire, that the hostages are released, and that Hamas, a terrorist organization, surrenders and lays down its arms. To me, that is very important. Otherwise, I fear that these innocent hostages you would see a ceasefire that would be one-sided, and the innocent hostages would have no chance of being returned. I'll continue to speak out, as I said, against the Israeli government to make sure that there is a responsible prosecution of its effort to target Hamas. This is not a comfortable issue to talk about. We've seen innocent Israelis killed. We've seen innocent Palestinians killed. And as a father of 3 little kids, and you remind me of this when you write to me and say that I'm a father of 3 little kids, it is absolutely crushing to think about innocent loss of life. I think about it every day. I watch images that no one would ever want to watch, because I know that's my job, is to understand this, to process this, and to lead on this. And so I appreciate that so many of you care so deeply about this. And I hope you see me as an office that will continue to listen to you, learn from you, but also urge you to believe that we can be aggressive listeners on this, and that we do not have to be forced to one corner or another in this debate. It is not a question of whether Israel should level Gaza or whether we just blanketly say Israel is a genocidal state that's committing apartheid and reduce ourselves to anti-Semitic slurs. Those seem to be 2 popular corners right now, and I think all of us are better than that in this conflict, and the children in this conflict deserve better than that. They deserve aggressive listening, understanding, and an appreciation of the complexity of this issue, and doing everything we can to defeat terrorism and protect innocent life. That's where I approach this issue, first as a father, second as an American, and third as your representative, who's honored to have the ability to call himself your representative in Congress. So thank you again. As we end this year, I'm going to turn it over now to some of the individuals in the community who are going to ask questions, and then I will pull out some questions myself. And the first individual is Spojmi Naziri, who is of Pleasanton, California. Spojmi, it's nice to see you on here. I'm going to turn it over to you for the first question.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with our community, especially during the holiday season. Grateful for all your comments, and a heartfelt thank you for your support throughout the difficult times, and not only under the Trump administration, but other times where you've come forward and stood by our community. Our hearts break, both for the Israeli and the Palestinian hostages, and innocent people should not be kept away from their families or killed. Thus far, over 1.4 million people have been forcibly displaced in Gaza, and more than 20,000 Palestinians have been killed. Of that, about 7,000 of those killed were children, and on average, the age is 5 years old. This collective punishment campaign undermines the 2-state solution you have advocated for over the years, and I'm grateful for that. I know you touched on it, but I want to ask you again and possibly give us a little bit more detail about what prevents you from calling for a permanent ceasefire in Palestine, knowing that a military solution isn't viable, and where this offense will only lead to more death and destruction of life on both sides. So I know you elaborate on that, but I would like to get a perspective on why you haven't been able to come forth and join for a permanent ceasefire in Palestine. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Spojmi. I would first say I supported the ceasefire that existed a couple of weeks back. That was productive. We saw aid coming in, for the Palestinian people. We saw hostages returned, to Israel. And again, when I hear people say ceasefire, what I always like to understand is, what do you mean by ceasefire? Because to different people, it means different things. And some of you have cited my colleagues who've called for a ceasefire, but many of them who've called for a ceasefire have not signed on to the ceasefire resolution, which I believe only has 18 members of the House of Representatives of 435 who have signed on. So it's clear to me that there's different interpretations of ceasefire. To me, as I said, it means Hamas returns every hostage, Hamas surrenders, Israel stops any attacks in Gaza. That's, to me, a two-way negotiated ceasefire, which I support. And as I said, in addition to that, I have called on the Israeli government, as I said, if they're going to receive U.S. defense systems, they have to follow, the human rights laws that we expect every country to follow as we give them defense systems. I will also note, though, because some of you have noted in the questions that you have sent into my office week after week, that we are funding Israel's war in Gaza, and the truth is, as I understand it, we've only had one vote to give Israel aid for this conflict. I voted against it because it did not include humanitarian aid for Palestinians, and it did not get a vote at all in the Senate. So Israel is not using new funds from the U.S. at this point for its conflict in Gaza. We have given it funds in the past for defending itself with Iron Dome, but there have been no new funds allocated to Israel since this conflict began. The next question, I believe, is going to come from Sandra Nasser from Castro Valley. I think my staff is just admitting Sandra.
Having a technical thing, we're going to move to the next person.
Okay, we'll come back to Sandra. Manav Patel from Livermore, representing the National Iranian American Council. Manav, you should be live.
Hi, Congressman. So I'm a
Hey,
constituent.
Manav. And I see Sandra also, so we'll keep Sandra there. We'll go to Manav first. Go ahead, Manav. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. So the situation in Palestine right now is horrifying. There are more than 17,000 Palestinians that have been killed, over 6,000 children, 40,000 people that have been wounded, and 1.8 million people that have been displaced. For me, it's impossible to understand how this slaughter could be of any benefit to the United States, Israel, the EU, or the wider world when the target of these attacks are children. What's worse still, we have still ever seen regional tensions in the Middle East, including near constant attacks from the militias in Iraq and Syria on US bases since the outbreak of this conflict. Before diplomacy had all but halted these kinds of dangerous attacks, but as long as the war in Gaza continues, these attacks risk drawing the US into a full-blown regional conflagration. Given these risks, I hope you will consider your position on a ceasefire and also ask that you warn against an escalation to a broader regional war. Is that something you can do? Will you consider supporting conditional aid to Israel in line with existing standards for other countries like the Leahy Law?
So Manav, thank you for that question. And that's the letter that I sent, was essentially saying that the Leahy Law, which expects every country and requires every country that receives US aid, follows, human rights practices. And I'll just, again, reiterate what I support on a ceasefire. I want a ceasefire, but I want those hostages returned. I want Hamas disarmed. And to me, that means Israel, when that happens, should not further, target Hamas in Gaza. I'll also say, though, because it is important and it's worth saying, there was a ceasefire in place for 800 plus days. And so, that ceasefire was broken when Hamas savagely went in, to Israel and, murdered, women and babies and a pregnant woman, for example, and kidnapped babies and children and the elderly. So, there was a ceasefire. It was broken. I want to get back to the ceasefire. but I don't want to see Hamas able to carry out an attack like this again. Sandra.
Hello.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Mr. Swalwell.
And Sandra,
been-
I should just mention, you are not with an affiliated, or you're not with an organization, but you have very effectively stitched together many constituents in our congressional district for demonstrations at our office. And you have been forceful, I would say, in making the point you want to make, but you've been respectful and peaceful. And I want to just thank you for that and the respect that you've shown to my staff as we've, had exchanges over this issue. So please, it's yours.
Yes, and I will continue to stay respectful.
Yeah.
You and I have met before. I wonder if you'll remember me. I'm a Palestinian American, and I am beyond heartbroken to see what is happening to the innocent civilians in Palestine. I was born in San Francisco in 1963, and at the age of 1, moved back with my parents and my siblings to Palestine. My first memory was exactly 5 weeks before my 4th birthday, when armored Israeli tanks rolled down our street. I can vividly recall the fear gripping my body as the playmates I was amongst dispersed, I running as fast as I could to find shelter in my mother's arms. That was in 1967, when the remaining 22% of Palestine was occupied by Israel. And since then, and for the past 56 years, that occupation has gotten more and more brutal and more suffocating. Mr. Swalwell, I really do thank you for meeting with us today. I have written you many times since October 7th, and you have repeatedly responded with how horrified you are about the attacks committed in Israel. My question to you is, are you not horrified by the genocide taking place, in which over 20,000 people, half of which are children, have been murdered? Are you not horrified by the acronym WCNSF, which stands for Wounded Child with No Surviving Family, an all too common tragedy these days? You responded also and said that you are disgusted, and you repeated it tonight. You started out with telling us how disgusted you are with the barbaric attacks by Hamas. Again, I ask you, do you not see that 66 days of constant 24/7 bombardment on a besieged population of 2.3 million people with the most sophisticated weapons, including white phosphorus, as anything other than barbaric? Congressman, in your letter, you also said that Israel has a right to defend itself. And you repeated it again today, and you always repeat that. I ask you, from whom? From doctors, from professors, poets, journalists, mothers, babies, for goodness sakes, because those are the people Israel is targeting. Those are the people we have witnessed being dug out from under the rubble. And if they are lucky enough to survive and be transported to hospital, that is no consolation, as hospitals are being ruthlessly attacked as well. It's an outrage that our government, with billions of our tax dollars and with our support, and with the support of most of our representatives, including you, I'm sorry to say, you still dare to stand with what I call the rabid government of Israel. Netanyahu has said that he wants to turn Gaza into a parking lot. Other officials, both Israeli and Americans, have called for the annihilation of Gaza. Zionists are chanting in the streets, in America and in Israel, death to the Arabs, yet no one is calling them out for their hateful crimes. As I was preparing for this meeting with you, Congressman, I received the most awful news. My good friend Nadia, born in San Mateo, a graduate of Cal State Hayward, lost 25 members of her family on Sunday, December 10th. due to an Israeli airstrike. How can anyone not see this loss and hundreds more like it as horrific and barbaric? What has become apparent is that these crimes happening before our eyes with the blessing and full financial support of the United States government are putting all of us at risk. Our politicians have lost the respect of the world because they are guilty of being complicit for the atrocities being perpetrated on the Palestinian civilians, and as a result are compromising our safety here in America. Our unconditional support of Israel to kill and to steal from indigenous Palestinians with our tax dollars is destroying America's reputation and position in the world. How shameful that we should all feel, and might I add, barbaric, that we belong to the only country in the world that has once again vetoed another UN resolution simply calling for a ceasefire. Congressman Swalwell, in your reply, you have also said, and I quote, "Innocent Gazan Palestinians are as worthy of our empathy and support as an Israeli family on the other side of the security perimeter." My question to you is, how do you expect us to believe that you have any empathy and support for us when you cannot utter the word ceasefire? When you are simply, we are simply asking you as our representative to stop rendering us invisible. We are being murdered by the tens of thousands, and we demand that you call for a ceasefire now. Furthermore, I need to clarify that what you refer to as a security perimeter is more aptly called an apartheid wall by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and has for 17 years kept over 2 million people caged in an open air prison. No one can get in or out of Gaza without the Zionists' approval and permission. What makes this current situation so unbelievably appalling is that even now, as the bombs are raining on over 2 million, they are not allowed to escape the besieged evil brutality. It has been described like shooting fish in a barrel. It is important to point out that since October 7th, nearly 4,000 detainees, which we consider to be our hostages, have been imprisoned, many under administrative detention, a procedure that allows the Israeli military to hold them indefinitely without charging them or allowing them to stand trial. The most recent children and women that were released in the exchange for some of the Israeli hostages described the most horrifying conditions of being stripped, beaten, and denied food, water, blankets, of overcrowded prison cells, and of never being allowed to see their lawyers or parents. I am not hearing a call, not a whisper for the Palestinian hostages to be freed. Actually, if we are really being real here, in many ways, all Palestinians have been held hostage for over 75 years. It has been said, recently I heard, an army versus an army is a war. But an army versus a civilian population is a genocide. What is taking place in Gaza, and the world knows this, is a genocide. Nevertheless, this genocide, also referred to as a war on children, could have ended weeks ago. But with the unlimited supply of bombs and ammunition, our government, with our tax money, provides the horrors continue as we speak tonight. As a Palestinian witnessing this nightmare, this war on our beautiful children, day in and day out, it is taking an incredible toll on my mental and physical well-being. It is hurting all of our well-being. Enjoy a meal, a shower, a day of rest from the carnage that is being perpetrated on our people. The only silver lining here, however, is that finally, we Palestinians are no longer alone in this struggle. The people of the world see now and understand our story, our 75-year struggle with the brutal colonizers, and through their anguish, have vowed to never abandon Palestine. Anyone with an ounce of humanity is suffering right now with the Palestinian people. For if this can happen to children, to babies, then what is to stop it from happening to their children as well? From the millions of people protesting in the streets all over the world, and from my brothers and sisters with me today on this Zoom call, I want to assure you that in the thousands, in the millions, we are all Palestinian. And finally, I ask why, Mr. Swalwell, why do you continue to minimize my suffering and suffering of my people, those who are brutally occupied? Why are magnifying the suffering of those whose government are brutal occupiers? We are here to demand a permanent and immediate ceasefire. And honestly, we deserve an apology for the lives that have been destroyed by IHF.
So Sandra,
Thank you.
let me go through these. And I do have empathy for you and the Palestinian people. And frankly, I think it's when people level charges like that, that someone is complicit or they don't have empathy. That's what reduces this conversation and takes it to a place where there's no understanding. And frankly, it's a lack of empathy. I think when you make a charge like that, I don't question your motives one bit. I understand why you're upset. And I see you, and you said that you're invisible to me. You're not invisible to me at all. And there's nothing about my 11-year record on this issue or standing up for the Muslim people that any person could say and pass a lie detector test that I believe the Palestinian or Muslim community is invisible. I think we have a different interpretation of what ceasefire means. And I think if we polled, the hundreds of people who are on this Zoom, there would be a different interpretation of what ceasefire means. I'm telling you, I support a permanent ceasefire where hostages are released and Hamas surrenders. And I don't, as empathetic as you are for the Palestinian people, which I don't question and are worthy of your empathy. And by the way, I am horrified. Any innocent Palestinian, and there have been, as you pointed out, innocent Palestinians who have been killed in this conflict, it's horrifying. And that's why I will continue to sign on to letters or legislation that, go at that issue. But it's also horrifying to me that mothers are in captivity right now and held by Hamas. And I would also, I think anyone on that side who is wondering if their family member is alive wants to also know, do you believe that Hamas should return those hostages? And a lot of these hostages are and I've been to many of the, I've been to the kibbutz that suffered the most loss of life. The people who live there they're not anti-Muslim, they're not anti-Palestinian. Many of them live there because they want to live, and integrate and have harmony. And so if your target was Israel and its government, like the people that were kidnapped were, by and large, innocent Israelis. So that's where I believe we have to also say these hostages and their lives are important and are a part of a conversation about a ceasefire. I'm just going through your different questions here, and I want to make sure. And yes, Israel has a right to defend itself. It does not have a right to target innocent Palestinians. And when I say there's complexity in this issue, to me, as a 8-year member of the Intelligence Committee, a member of the Homeland Security Committee, and just somebody who reads the newspaper, there's no question that Hamas has embedded itself into civilian populations. That doesn't mean you don't have an obligation as Israel, to protect against the loss of innocent life, but it certainly makes it more complex as you try and go after an actor like Hamas. And so, again, I want a permanent ceasefire, and I'll say that over and over, but I want hostages returned and I want Hamas to surrender. That doesn't seem like it's very hard. And I would hope that the Palestinian people are as anti-Hamas as I am, because I'm pro-Palestinian and anti-Hamas. Our last question is from Mac Levine, and Sandra, I let you continue there, and I wasn't going to interrupt you because I do respect you. But there are a lot of other questions from the community in this bowl that I would like to get to. So our last question will come from Mac Levine, or Levine, I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, who represents the Muslim Democrats of Alameda County.
Oh, actually, that is not who I represent. And
Mac, that didn't seem right to me. My staff wrote that.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, Mac, you're live.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You're not likely to see a Levine representing. Muslim.
I thought that was wrong. So
Yeah, no
I didn't
worries.
want to judge your question. So
all good.
fix that.
You just got to read what's on the teleprompter. No worries, man. Yes. So, hello, Congressman. My name is Mac Levine, and you had that right. I think the second time, Levine. I've been a resident of Castro Valley for 4 years. I'm a father myself. I'm a husband. I'm a Jew, and I'm an anti-Zionist. Now that's interesting, okay? Because in light of your vote on Resolution 894, which directly conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, I'm very interested. I'm very interested in what you would call me, a Jewish person who is anti-Zionist. I get quite a bit of, there's some slurs that are thrown around. I think self-hating is quite frequently one that I encounter, and I would suspect that your answer to this question is likely to be rooted in, your answer to this question is very likely to be rooted in Israel having a right to exist. And that's probably what your support of the resolution has to do with, right? I anticipate that. Now, I have to ask though, this is always an interesting question to me. In what form does Israel or any state for that matter have the right to exist, right? The formal structure of the government, the formal structure of society, because I always think about South Africa as a state. Prior to 1994, do we believe South Africa should have had a right to exist? And I think a lot of people, would now definitely say, no, there was a huge movement against the formal organization of that kind of society. Now, Congressman, I had something prepared, but I really feel in my heart of hearts that my role right now should be kind of backing up Sandra on her assertion that, it feels like you need to, it feels like you are not perhaps demonstrating the appropriate amount of empathy. And let me explain why. I think in your statements earlier today, you are asserting that Israel's motivation is rooting out Hamas, right? And you used the passive voice consistently when speaking about the loss of life in Palestine. Now that's interesting. That to anybody who, Sandra mentioned she has a close friend who lost 25 members of her extended family. You have to ask yourself, does that person care what Israel's stated motives are, right? And that perhaps when you reach this kind of death toll, that when you reach this kind of civilian death toll, should those motivations come into question? And if you're to demonstrate empathy for somebody, and acknowledge that what's happened to their children, what's happened to their extended family, as brutal, as inhumane, deeply brutal, inhumane, you have to identify an actor behind that violence. And when you do it with a passive voice, I believe that it demonstrates a lack of empathy. And when you sort of take a government's motivation at face value, then I believe too that demonstrates a lack of empathy, right? That as an anti-Zionist, I believe we have to be critical of any state's stated intention, right? Especially Israel, especially one that is, whose behavior is an indictment of me in many ways to many people and the Jewish diaspora, right? It is, I feel it is, I just feel that it's a moral imperative to do so. And so I think I've deviated a little bit from the nature of what my question is, but I thought it was important to sort of push back on this assertion that you say that you made this statement that claiming that there's a lack of empathy really sort of is what was it you said, that it just sort of makes these kinds of conversations impossible. But I think that you as a representative if you're a person who wants to apply abstract principles like self-determination, like the right to safety, like the right to one's home, if you want to apply that like broadly speaking, especially to everybody who lives in areas, I'm not going to say in Israel, but in areas under Israel's control, right? Then you have to, I would expect from you perhaps a more forceful condemnation of the violence that Israel is waging, and to not use the passive voice, and to not just toe the line that says Israel's sole motives are rooting out Hamas. That perhaps it's time to start speaking about this a little bit differently. And I know you're not going to use the word genocide. I don't expect that from you. But I do expect, just if you want to demonstrate empathy, for all of your constituents, including Sandra, Congressman, frankly, I think it's imperative that you simply say Israel is committing crimes.
So let me address that. I want to go through the Zionist part first. I'm going to step aside for a second. So Mac, I grabbed, this is today's copy of the New York Times, and you can see here, is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism by definition. So you raise an issue that is on the front page of the New York Times, upper right corner. So the most important story that they think they should run. So it's clearly, to me, like, and I've read the article, it's open to interpretation whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. I'll tell you why I voted to say that anti-Zionism can be anti-Semitic, because to me, Zionism represents the right of the Jewish people to have their own state. It does not represent support for the Israeli government. I have been face-to-face a number of times with Prime Minister Netanyahu, including earlier this year, and I have told him that I don't agree with his policies on settlements or his lack of support for a two-state solution. I don't support Prime Minister Netanyahu, but the idea that, especially after the Holocaust, that the Jewish people have, a right, to have their own state, is what, in my interpretation, Zionism is about. Now, this article lays out that there are multiple interpretations, but as I voted for that bill, it was under that interpretation, not under any belief that, I don't believe it is anti-Semitic to criticize the Israeli government. I think that is patriotic if you're Israeli or American to criticize your government. That's your right. I got to the bottom also of why I affiliated you with the Muslim Dems. My staff tells me that Moina, who I don't think is able to make this chat, she designated you as a representative for her group of the Muslim Dems. So again, I'm sorry for the misaffiliation. But again, it's just going back to, this question of empathy. You can say I'm not empathetic. It's interesting that you think what I feel for and what I don't. That's fine. I think what this is really about is you don't agree with me on what I believe is the solution here, and that's different than empathy. Like, we both can care about what's happening, but we both have different interpretations of what the outcome can be. But that doesn't mean that I question your empathy. You can question and criticize my policy. I think it's just it's interesting that you think what my level of empathy is, because I don't think that's what the issue is here. The issue is you don't like how I define ceasefire, and that's fine. That's your right. And I will tell you, and my pledge to all of you is that I will continue to be open-minded, and believe that my position on this can change as the events change. As to the passive voice, look, I'm a public school kid from high school to college to law school. So, English was probably never my best subject. So that was not by any intention or intent to use the active voice. I'm gonna get to these questions now, because there's a lot of questions that people had, and I want to get to them. And before I do that, just out of fairness to the number of people who wrote about the same question, to not repeat itself, my staff flagged some that were so similar that they thought before I go to a random poll that it was just fair to kind of knock these out for your sake, and then pull them out, answer them, knock them out by making sure they got answered. Ed R asked the question that many of you asked: what prevents you from following your colleague Ro Khanna's call for a permanent ceasefire in Palestine, knowing that a military solution isn't viable and where this offensive will only create further loss of innocent life as well as rage and radicalization? Don't you think this collective punishment campaign undermines the two-state solution you've advocated for? I'll have my staff fact check this for me. I don't think Ro Khanna is on the ceasefire resolution. Well, I'll check on that right now. And this goes to my point that we have all in different ways use the word ceasefire, and sometimes it makes you happy and someone else unhappy how we use it. And I hope tonight you have a better understanding of what my current state is in belief about ceasefire. And this is my staff telling me they're going to fact check me on that. There was a second question in there. And yes, I do believe that Israel risks jeopardizing any future of a two-state solution as innocent lives, to use the active voice, as innocent lives are taken in this conflict. And you also risk giving Hamas what their goal is, which is, I think, to one of the earlier speakers pointed out, to have a regional conflict that the United States gets drawn into. Ashab S. from Fremont said, given the stats coming out from this offensive, does killing one Hamas operative for every 100 civilians seem like a morally equivalent trade to you? This offensive has been often mischaracterized as a war or conflict, but multiple legacy human rights organizations have more accurately identified it as collective punishment amounting to a genocidal ethnic cleansing campaign. In light of all of this, why are we still providing aid to Israel, paying for the destruction wrought upon an entire people? Why haven't you called for a permanent ceasefire? I think I've answered most of this, but I would just again say that I voted against the most recent Israeli aid package because of concerns that I had that were raised in that question. My staff has fact checked me. Khanna is not on the ceasefire now resolution. So again, I think that goes to much of the confusion around what we all mean on ceasefire. Roger J. and others, actually, this is off topic, and I want to stay on topic on Israel for a second. According to opensecrets.org, you have received funding of various quantities from pro-Israel PACs, including J Street from 2023-2024, J Street PAC, and American Israel Public Affairs Committee in 2021-2022, Americans United in Support of Democracy, City PAC, and J Street PAC in 2019-2020. From a community member's perspective, and this is Samantha G. from Hayward, it presents itself as if the hesitation to condemn Israel for its actions and call for an immediate ceasefire is because funding will potentially be withdrawn because of doing so. What are your thoughts on this perspective? What clarification can you provide as to your level of involvement with these organizations, past, present, and future? Look, I am honored that anyone would want to support my campaign. I'm honest with anyone who supports my campaign. That support, is an investment in somebody who's going to always try and do the right thing, but it's never an investment in a trade for any particular policy position. And if this same individual wanted to dive deeper into Open Secrets, they would also see Muslim organizations that have supported my campaign. PAC is one of those organizations, and Muslim Americans from my district all over the country have supported my campaign. I've also been to the ISNA conference that gathers many of the Muslim leaders together across the country. So again, I'll leave it to you it's your right to decide what all of that means. But I think I have a 11-year record of standing up for the community, but also for speaking out. And by the way, AIPAC did not support the Iran nuclear deal. On October 16 of this year, Lindsey Graham said that we should level Gaza. And I said that anyone who says that, including Senator Graham, should resign, that it's wrong to say that. It dehumanizes Palestinians, and it's no better than what Hamas did. And I received, criticism and blowback from people in the Jewish community for that. So I think I'm pretty independent on this. And again, it's your right to raise this, and I guess my right to defend it. Members of the community have organized to engage you multiple times. To stage this virtual town hall, which decenters the primary issue, is a revocation of that promise and is a reflection of the neglect and evasion we are sensing. Can you please stage an in-person town hall? We're 51 minutes in, and we've only talked about Gaza. So again, I understand what Gohar from Fremont and many others who've asked the same question may have raised, but we're talking about this right now. And of course, in the new year, we look forward to having in-person and virtual town halls. Some other questions. How do you justify signing on to HR 894? Mac, this is what you asked about as far as relating anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. I think we answered that one. Roger in Livermore, what is the current global strategy, not just for California, for the Democrats to take back the House of Representatives, hopefully by a wide margin? A lot of you asked this question. Look, as I said in the beginning, good policy is good politics, and I think Democrats have been united on wanting to get things done on the issues that you care about in your life. And at the end of the day, I think people sent us here to do something, not to fight among ourselves or fight for just one person in the former president. And sorry, I guess I missed this one. Marwa from Pleasanton, going back to the Middle East. Can you please advise what stops you from demanding an immediate ceasefire? And again, I think we're all on the same page now as far as what I believe and want to see for a ceasefire. I want to get to many of these questions. As I said, I don't know what's in here. So I'm going to show you that I'm pulling one of these out, and we'll try and get through as many of these as I can. Of course, I would pick one of the longest ones. Dennis N. from Pleasanton, the current federal tax system is very unfair to constituents of districts like yours, where the cost of living is the highest. So how is it fair that the federal income tax limits don't take that into account? A family living in the Bay Area earning $120,000 will struggle to make ends meet, where the same amount will be 2 to 3 times the median income in several other states. In addition to this, we also lost the ability to deduct SALT from federal taxes, making it even more unfair for residents. What are your thoughts on fixing this unfair system? I completely agree with Dennis. First and foremost, the wealthiest in California, in America, are not paying their fair share. That includes corporations, and no secretary should pay the same, or administrative assistant should pay the same effective tax rate as a billionaire boss. That's wrong. It happens all over America. I also support and have supported putting back in place that SALT deduction that lets you deduct your state and local taxes. That's SALT, S-A-L-T, state and local taxes. And anytime we make legislation, whether it was recently with student loan debt forgiveness when the administration was seeking to do that, I've always advocated to treat California and any higher cost of living area differently, recognizing the same point that Dennis made. And I support that as well in the tax code, that it's just not fair that someone in Omaha and someone in Pleasanton, would be treated the same as it relates to income levels. We'll pull another one out. Harmon from Hayward asks, our country has the capacity to address the needs of people around the world as climate change exacerbates global poverty, forced displacement, conflict, hunger, and other issues. What can Congress do to act in global leadership to address the impact of climate change and ensure that communities worldwide can strengthen their resilience and thrive? Well, first, being a part of the Paris Climate Agreement with the League of Nations that are taking this on is critical. We were not a part of that under President Trump. We obviously now are striving to meet those obligations under President Biden. The Inflation Reduction Act makes the biggest investments ever in climate, bringing us to carbon neutrality, hopefully by 2030, with investments that it makes in clean energy, whether it's carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and just investments in clean energy like solar, wind, storage. My priority project, the Valley Link rail system, ideally and hopefully is going to be a hydrogen project, which would again be clean energy. The Infrastructure Jobs Act, the bipartisan bill the president passed, also billions of dollars in climate jobs projects. And so that's where we can lead the way with how we invest. I'm going to pull this out here and grab another one. Rhonda C. from Pleasanton, what work is being done to change or eliminate the Electoral College so our California and Bay Area voices can be weighed in accordance with our numbers? Rhonda, zero. and that is because I don't think it'll ever happen. And I want to focus on things that can happen. I agree with you that it just, as Dennis mentioned, it's not fair that you're almost punished for the high cost of living in California because we're such a big state. We have the same amount of senators as South Dakota or Wyoming or North Dakota. North and South Dakota, and my mom was born in South Dakota, so I have to be careful. They have 4 senators combined, and that's like 2 million people. 40 million people, we have 2 senators. And so that issue plays out in the Electoral College, obviously, where you can win the popular vote. And we've seen the Republican who's been nominated and won the presidency the last 2 times has lost the popular vote and won the Electoral College. However, to change that, you of course would have to change the Constitution, and you would need the smaller states to go against their own interest, which again, I don't think they'll ever do. So I'm focused on democratic reforms like getting rid of dirty money and dirty maps. So getting rid of super PAC, non-transparent money that is also it's unlimited, non-transparent money, and gerrymandered maps that protect politicians and the party in power. We do a great job in California with independent redistricting in the top 2 primary, but if California is the only state doing it, and we're really one of the only states doing it, that doesn't help us achieve many of these issues. So I've supported the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would bring that federally into our system. Going back to our bowl here, bring another one out. Oh, this is like a sneaky one, 2 for 1. Got Patricia from Hayward. What do you think about the Democrats' chances to retake the House in the next election? And Patricia, I think I answered that one earlier. Majgan from Fremont. The Iran regime is behind attacks on our U.S. commercial and warships. At least 45 service members have been injured in Iran-linked attacks in Syria. They continue cracking down on Iranians seeking the very basic human rights and execute political prisoners in record numbers. They pose a national security threat to us and our allies, including Israel and Ukraine. Why did you not vote for HR 5961 last week to hold them accountable? I was the co-author of the MASA Act, which increases our ability to sanction the Iranian regime. Again, I voted for the Iran nuclear deal to restrict them from being able to achieve a nuclear weapon. This legislation, though, it didn't just go after Iran. It actually went after, it would go after other allies of the United States, like South Korea, for example, if you take a perverted sense of what those countries are doing. And this goes back to President Biden unfreezing assets that belong to Iran to get American hostages back. These are assets that already belong to Iran, that South Korea, I believe, had frozen. The hostages came home to America, but under this legislation, it would have sanctioned an ally like South Korea, where we have 50,000 Americans at a base, just south of North Korea. So I thought it had unintentional consequences and didn't just target Iran. Let's keep going. Bill from Hayward, I'm very concerned about the military conflict between Israel and Hamas. I believe that the United States must require that Israel publicly acknowledge their goal of a two-state solution before any more U.S. money is sent to Israel. Please comment directly on this restriction. I support a two-state solution. I want a two-state solution. I've told the Prime Minister eye to eye that I want to see that happen. And I do believe that the United States needs to more assertively, expect that from Israel as we go forward. Try and get another one out here. Rupa from Pleasanton, the permanent ceasefire in Palestine and the ending of the starvation and slaughter of over 7,000 innocent, beautiful children is a top priority for many of your constituents and the majority of minority groups, young people 18 to 35. We will not re-elect you unless you stand up for humanity and against Biden's cowardice policies. Will you commit to supporting a permanent ceasefire? Again, I tried to go through these, but you can see these are random that I'm pulling out. So I think you understand my position on ceasefire. I will just say, though, you may disagree on the policy of the Biden administration. You may disagree with me and how I would structure a ceasefire, but I just want you to think for a second, where would this conflict be if Donald Trump was still the president? The architect of the Muslim ban, somebody who had threatened on other conflicts, to use nuclear weapons. I promise you, this would be so ugly, and it would be that regional conflict that the first speaker alluded to. And so, you may not agree with President Biden and in how he's conducting this, but in the alternative, it would be much, much worse. And I would also say President Biden has empathy, and Donald Trump does not. And again, there's a difference between empathy and policy. And I know that President Biden sees every face of this conflict. He may not agree with his policy, but he sees every face of this conflict. Donald Trump, absolutely, give me a break. This would be completely different if anyone thinks that Donald Trump would be better on this issue than President Biden. Again, trying to breeze through these. Ashir B. Eric, at what point would you feel that Israel, even as an ally, would have gone too far in its assault? Look, I do believe that there are too many innocent Palestinians who are being killed. And so Israel must address that. And that's why, in part, I signed on to the letter that I referenced at the beginning as far as aid that we provide to any country. However, as I said, those hostages should be returned to their family, and I don't want their lives to not be a part of this obviously understandable, very uncomfortable, unpleasant conversation. I'll pull another one out here. Michael H. What is it? When is it likely that Congress will pass a federal budget? Again, we are just kind of living congressional resolution or CR to CR, week to week, month to month, no long-term planning. That's the chaos that Republicans have brought. That is not what happened under Speaker Pelosi, President Biden, Leader Schumer, and it's not fair to any federal employee who has to think about, whether the government's going to shut down and they're going to lose their paycheck, or any one of you, if you have a job that relies on the federal government functioning, or if you want to know that you can plan a family vacation and there's going to be a TSA agent at the airport who can facilitate you getting on a plane. And so these guys have just wrought chaos onto the country. And I want to be always on team competence. And so my hope is that we will pass a budget long-term. It's an election year. I hope these geniuses who have tried to shut down the government over and over will recognize it's not that smart to do that in an election year. I'm not going to tell them how to run their elections, but that would be probably the dumbest thing they could do. So hopefully they're thinking about that as we go to fund the government in January and February. I'm going to take a couple more of these. Doug R. from Pleasanton, our premature drive to solar and wind energy seems unrealistic, expensive, and foolhardy. The technology is neither reliable nor clean. What can be done to reduce the current cost of energy while continuing to strive for cleaner alternatives? Look, I believe in all of the above until clean energy is fully scalable. So that means, we're not completely turning off, natural gas tomorrow, but we should turn it off as soon as we can, and we can power our needs with clean energy, because this is the number one issue that our kids think about every day: is will they inherit an earth that is livable? And every day that we delay, having a clean energy future or a clean energy now, that's a day that we're doing a disservice to those kids and their right, to be free to breathe. Take a couple more. Sam from Hayward. It's another Middle East question. I just want to make sure in the spirit of transparency, random bowl, random questions. My question pertains to the matter of foreign aid, specifically the significant disparity between the amount designated for Gaza and that allocated to Israel. While 100 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza is undoubtedly valuable, it is a mere fraction of what is truly needed to rebuild the devastated infrastructure, hospitals, roads, schools, and homes in Gaza. The residents of Gaza are grateful for the support, but it's clear that much more assistance is required. I 100% agree and will support completely, the rebuilding of Gaza and the idea that the Palestinian people deserve as much as the Jewish people who are in Israel, to live in security and economic prosperity. I have been to the West Bank multiple times. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to Tel Aviv, been to Haifa. I've been to Sderot. I've been all over the country, and the Palestinian areas. It's the same land, and the people should have the same opportunity and security. Go. Dan R. from Pleasanton. Speaker Johnson seems to want an evangelical Christian theocracy in this country, calling for an end to the constitutional separation of church and state. It's therefore shocking to ask this, but particularly given the current Supreme Court, how close are we to abandoning the Constitution, and what, if anything, can Democrats do to try and prevent this, other than saying vote? You've heard me say vote. Obviously, there's efforts in the courts that, I don't want to just say Democrats, just democracy-loving people have taken over the past few years, where we were not necessarily as aggressive in the past. We are now, and so we're increasing access to the ballot box. But yes, I believe in a separation of church and state, and I believe that many of this current speaker's beliefs are aimed at ruling rather than governing, and subtracting rather than adding when it comes to your freedoms. And so I promise that I will be a vote in the Congress and a supporter in the courts, and registering people to vote so they can make their own decision, Republican or Democrat, but at least have access, to the ballot box. All right, I'm going to take 3 more of these. We've gone over the time limit, but there were a lot of thoughtful questions, and I wanted to let them continue. James B. in Castro Valley: what can be done to improve the polarized and apparent dysfunctional situation in Congress? What actual bipartisan efforts are being proposed to improve towards a more collaborative environment? And bonus question from James B. the Bay Area has an enormous problem with homelessness. How can this complex problem be remediated? On homelessness, yes, obviously at home, it hurts to see, a veteran or someone, of the elderly or even children, homeless, but they're not homeless for the same reason. We know sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's addiction, sometimes it's criminal record that prevents them from being able to work. There's a lot of different reasons, and surging resources, in those compartmentalized ways, I think is a better way than like an across the board solution. Affordable housing is also a big role here, and we all have to do our part. And stepping back and saying, how can we make this happen as an affordable housing project, rather than just reflexively saying, no, I don't want that in my neighborhood. You had a question about bipartisanship. I'm not giving up on it. I had a committee hearing today on the cyber committee. I'm the ranking Democrat, the lead Democrat, and I see eye to eye with my Republican counterpart. And we took on the issue of AI, its benefits and threats. Every hearing we've had this Congress has been productive. I also chair the critical minerals caucus, working on making sure that we own our own minerals and we're not dependent on China or other adversaries for what we need to power our own needs in America. And I chair the Precision Medicine Caucus, working with Republicans to find ways to make genetic sequencing more affordable and accessible so that we can target therapies in the most efficient way. Two more here. We've got Harry from Fremont. Can you speak about the latest updates to immigration and border security? Also, he asked, what are HR differences on border security and immigration law? Can't find straight answer in press nor TV. Look, we need a secure border. We need to have an immigration system that reflects the needs of our economy, jobs that Americans just are unwilling to do, but we still need them to be done. And when Americans are unwilling to do them, the cost of having an American do it is dramatically higher. We see that, for example, in hospitality and childcare. I support a comprehensive immigration solution where we surge resources at the border. We use technology to understand who's coming across. We vet individuals. No one cuts the line. And we take care of the dreamers who came here by no fault of their own, and they have their own pathway to citizenship. We can do big things. This is the United States Congress. I didn't come here to do small things. And so my colleagues should also aspire to do big things. And so that remains the best solution. It had nearly 70 votes in 2014, Republicans, Democrats in the Senate, from Lindsey Graham to Marco Rubio to John McCain to every Democratic senator. That is still the path, and I am not giving up on that. Last question here. Pull this out. Danaz K from Pleasanton comments on Iran role in Gaza-Israel war. Why is the U.S. not actively addressing the Iranian regime role in arming, training, and funding these terrorist groups? The head of the snake is in Iran, as being noted by some politicians. Why is the U.S. not having a firm stand when it comes to the Ayatollahs? Look, we can always do more, but if you've seen, the U.S. has taken a number of strikes in Syria in just the last couple of weeks, going after Iranian-backed forces who are seeking to cause chaos. Also, it's time that my Republican colleagues connect the dots between Ukraine to what happened in Gaza, where Hamas, supported by Iran, broke the ceasefire, to murder innocent Israelis. That the same country that supported Hamas in that effort is the same country that supports Russia in its brutal attacks on Ukraine, using drones made in Iran to target innocent civilians in places like Kyiv and Kharkiv and all across Ukraine. And so, yes, we can always do more on that, but that's why we need to fund the effort in Ukraine as much as we need to fund the humanitarian needs and the needs to defeat Hamas in the Middle East. So it's been a long year. Thank you again for participating in this tonight. I look forward to seeing you across the district, as soon as we get out of here in Washington, D.C. And I just reiterate, I know on the issue that many of you from the top asked about, it's uncomfortable. And for me, I think about it every day. I pledge to not have a fixed, immovable position, that I will adjust as the facts adjust, but root my position in principles that I've always believed in. And so, again, thank you for engaging. Thank you for being respectful. And I look forward to seeing you all in the new years. And I wish you the best as you celebrate the holidays and move into the new year with your own family. So thank you all.